5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
You're listening to Tabletop and Beyond with your host, Justin.
But before we get started, how was your Geek Week?
And co-hosts Dan and Jason.
You have to be willing to let the dice help you tell the story.
Okay, look, this year I'm going to stop mispronouncing words. Join us as we cover board games to war games and beyond.
And welcome back to Tabletop and Beyond. I'm your host, Justin. I'm here with crew Dan and Jason. Welcome, boys.
Hey, good to be here.
Howdy.
Well, we've got a special show today. We're going to talk about the RPG Storytelling Collective, which is the thing that I mentioned way back in a couple podcasts this last summer that I started doing. Spoiler alert, I never actually finished it because it was a very busy month. I should have waited till this November, but we have a special guest with us today, Ashley Warren with the Storytelling Collective. Ashley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and don't feel bad about not finishing the workshop. It's totally okay.
I have lots of questions about how many people finish and don't finish, but I'm going to save that for later in the show.
Is that to try to help you feel better?
Yes, 100%.
Please make it a high percentage of failure.
So it's not failure, it's just delayed.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Ashley, you are joining us. You've got a little bit of a background in gaming. We talked about just before the show that in some of your bio that you are credited with writing parts of some D&D adventures. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Awesome. I think one of the most notable ones that we noticed was Rime of the Frost Maiden. The Icewind Dale saga, and listeners to our show will know how much we enjoyed playing that, so we're kind of geeking out a little bit to have you on here with us.
I'm so glad. It's always really exciting to hear about everyone's experience playing through that campaign, and yeah, it's fun to hear about where it's kind of it's a dark adventure campaign, I think, and can be kind of there's definitely some dangerous moments and stuff, but there's also some silly things in it. I don't know. I think it's just a really fun book, but I'm biased, of course.
We had a ton of fun with it, and again, I'm going to save a lot of my questions and kind of feedback for the main show of the podcast. Before we get into everything, of course, we need to do our Geek Week. So, Dan, why don't you kick us off with Geek Week?
So I took some of your words to heart when I was listening to some of the shows that you do with Winning Warcry, and you'd mentioned that board gamers don't like basing their minis.
That is true.
So you threw a little shade. That's okay. And I was guilty of just painting the bases black and moving on with my life. But now that in Star Wars Legion, I've built up my Mandalorian army. And I'm like, I have some tufts of grass and some free fake foliage from Army Painter. My free tufts of grass that I got at Nova Open in 2017, which I hadn't touched, were from gamersgrass.com. Wow. Don't forget the S in Gamersgrass, by the way. Gamers.
Okay. Right.
And they have really cool little teeny tiny tufts of grass. And so I've been putting down little tufts of grass, and I've been taking like helmets and guns and stuff off sprues and painting them and using them as like crap on the battlefield ground for my dudes, my Mandos, and their other supporting Shadow Collective guys. And I'm kind of enjoying it. And I was like, you know what? These little bases need? They need some real dirt, some real sand. And so I was like, my wife, and she goes to a beach. Sometimes she puts some beach sand in like a glass jar and wraps some seashell beads around it. I'm like, hey, sweetie, I want to try this out. Do you have a couple tablespoons of your beach sand I can have? She's like, I don't know where that is. Yes, you can have some. And I'm like, if you don't want me to use it, I'll just go buy sand at like Michael's or the other place. She's like, don't buy dirt. So then I'm like, so I can use your beach sand, right? And she's like, if you can find it. So right now I'm not allowed to go buy beach sand. And I can't find the beach sand in that house.
Sounds like you need to drive to the beach then, Dan.
I You know what's bad when you walk around the property at your house and you're like, none of this material is suitable for a mini. So
That's funny.
anyway, I'm trying to up my miniatures game by doing real bases and having a lot of CA glue, super glue stuck to my finger. So much so that I have leveraged my orbital power sander to get it off the tips of my fingers. I feel like I'm a convict trying to burn off my fingerprints. So anyway, that's been my Geek Week, has been playing with teeny tiny tufts of grass and power sanding my fingertips.
We've leveled you up, Dan. We've leveled you up as a miniature guy.
I'm working on. I see. One skill at a time.
That's right.
Yeah, I use
right.
Gamergrass too. I really like that stuff. I think they've got a pretty wide variety of different themes for different landscapes, and it's not that expensive either to kind of get a pack of it.
And they look teeny tiny on the little piece of wax paper, and then when you put them on the base, they actually
Yeah,
fill
to
in
scale.
quite nicely. So, ironically, the free grass that I got was all kind of beach themed. I'm like, sweetie, I need your beach sand from the beach that's your favorite beach in the world. I want to use it for gaming. Let's just say I was less than popular with that conversation.
A life hack, or a gamer basing life hack. If you go to the dollar store, you can get bags of different coarse and fineness of sand.
Oh, the dollar store.
It's at the dollar store. Yeah, super cheap, and you can get all the way down to the super fine that would be almost like grit on sandpaper, right?
Right.
All the
I'll
way
have
up
to give
to
that a
fishbowl
look.
size.
I almost look for that cheap, purpley play sand that the kids have. I'm like, that's not going to work.
Sometimes what people do is they'll go in their yard and they'll dig up some dirt, and then they'll bake it in the oven.
Yeah,
That's too much work.
I would
It
be
is.
very unpopular if I was baking dirt in my
Baking
oven.
dirt.
Yeah, that's funny.
Anyway, long story short, I'm trying to get into it. I'm trying to enjoy this aspect of the hobby, and I really want to finish this Mando army so I can start building my Imperial army. So anyway, that's been
Very cool.
my Geek Week. I'll pass it on.
Hey, Ashley, do you play with miniatures in your RPGs when you play?
Sometimes when I'm DMing, no, because I'm not a very I don't know. I should be more of a proactive DM and actually plan out things like that. But when my friend DMs for our group, he usually uses minis and has a bunch of great little things for us. So
Hey, there's
it's-
two schools.
yeah.
There's two schools in the podcast here.
Yeah,
So
I
don't worry,
aspired.
you're in one of them.
I aspire to be better, but I just don't have a lot of time, and so yeah, most of the time we do theater of the mind to my party's chagrin. But whatever, they take what they can get.
Yeah.
Jason's a theater of the mind.
I am 100. When you say do better, I'm like, do better means less minis in RPGs.
Yeah,
Ouch.
Strictly
Ouch.
theater of the mind for me.
That hurts, man. You know how much I love my minis.
I know.
Yeah.
No, there's a time and a place for them. But I'm a theater of the mind guy myself. That's my camp.
Ashley, you're 1,000% correct in that to do minis well, you have to plan it out really well.
Yeah.
Like you've got to like figure everything out, and when you just kind of roll out just a flat battle mat and sort of do it with markers and then have minis on it, it just does not do the same. You just kind of you have to plan out a lot more. So yeah.
yeah. And sometimes, I mean, as most DMs, I never really know what my players are going to do, and sometimes just
Right.
accounting for every single thing they may encounter, I'm like, I don't know, nobody got time for that. I don't have time for that right now.
That's true. Very true. Very true. Well, Jason, how was your Geek Week, buddy?
I'm trying to yank off of my theater of the mind soapbox that I was getting ready to stand up on. But all right, so
We've heard it before.
I know. All right, so I had a fun Geek Week. I played a little game called Trek to Yomi, which is a tiny little video game. It's on PlayStation X. It's on all the platforms. Actually, I don't know if it's on the PC. Yeah, it is. It's on all the platforms right now. PlayStation, Xbox, PC. I don't think it's on the Switch. But it's a tiny little, I'll call it a 2.5D side scroller, because it's one of those where like the camera can kind of twist a little bit, so you can kind of have a little freedom of movement in a 3D space, but not quite. So it has a little bit of linearity. But it's set in the Edo, Japan period in the Shinto mythology. it feels like you are playing a black and white grainy samurai movie. It is a beautiful game. It has enough of a simple combat mechanic where you're literally kind of running from side to side and attacking the enemies as they come to you. But it's not just a button masher. So there is a block, a parry mechanic, and there are a couple combos you kind of progressively learn as you play the game. But it is heavily drenched in the Shinto mythology, such that if you geek out over that kind of time period and kind of samurai stuff, and you like old samurai black and white movies, play this game because it is like you are playing one of the, in real time, one of those movies. It's a great little story. It's only about a 5-hour game, so it's not hard to bite into. And it's made by a small development team, published by Devolver Digital, but made by a small team. Real easy to play and really thematic. And it just was a great experience. And I only grabbed it because I was browsing Games Pass and was like, I want to burn like 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And so I picked it to cloud stream it, right? We've talked a lot about that. You can cloud stream games to try them without having to do the install. And it played really well over cloud streaming. So I decided to install it. Next thing I know, a couple nights later and burned through about 5.5 hours and I'd beat the game. But that was my Geek Week, so highly recommend checking that out if you like that kind of theme and time period.
That's very cool. I was thinking about you because I picked up a game the other day called Death's Door.
Oh, okay.
It's just a little indie game, and it's basically a Dark Souls light game, where like you kind of die, but you gather these souls and level up and stuff like that. A lot of fun, a little indie game on the cloud too. So I'm just gonna make a little plug for that.
Yeah, cool.
You should check it out.
Love, it's so worth the money. Whether you do Games Pass or any type of a games library, you're saving yourself so much money a year doing that. So many games that are options to you. Yeah, that was my Geek Week though.
Very good, Ashley. Do you have time for video games, or does your family and work and all that keep you busy?
At the moment, no. I do enjoy video games. I am not a very good video gamer, so when I play a game that I like, I tend to just continue to play that one game. I don't know. I wish I had time to play lots of different games because so many games look amazing, but it's not my main hobby, so I am pretty selective about things. But I enjoy video games.
What do you normally play when you do play them?
I mean, I definitely play casual stuff. I still play all of the Elder Scrolls games, even though they're like old at this point.
There's nothing to apologize for.
Like I booted up Oblivion recently, and that was fun. And I love that game so much. And of course, I like Skyrim and have I don't know, however many versions of Skyrim they have out now. And and then I really want to play the new Pokemon game, even though I know it's not being very well received right now, but I do enjoy those games. And yeah, that's kind of been it. I would like to play Valhalla, Assassin's Creed, but just again,
it's humongous.
Not a lot of time.
It's a huge world. That's when I dedicated time to, and I think it took me weeks and weeks to finish it. It was just so big.
Well, yeah, it's the same with the Elder Scrolls games, right? Yeah. Like I've played, I probably have 250 hours in Oblivion. I don't even know, probably that or more than that in Skyrim. I've never beat the games.
Yeah.
I mean, what nice. I think one night I was 2 a.m. and I stepped back from the computer and realized I'm sitting in my house next to the fire making cooking stuff with herbs.
Yep.
And I had 300 hours into the game and I'm like, what am I doing? I haven't even I'm just living in the world.
Yep. I totally get that.
Herbs. God, I need to go get that. I need more nin root. I need more nin root.
Yep.
That's awesome. Well, Ashley, how was your Geek Week?
It was good. I mean, every week in my life is Geek Week.
That's awesome.
I would say that, I guess recently, my D&D group, which is just my group of close friends where I live, we were planning our Wild Beyond the Witchlight campaign for next year, and I'm thankfully not DMing. It probably sounds like I hate DMing, which is not true. I will say I did not love DMing when the pandemic first started and we all switched to Zoom, and then I did not love DMing when I was very heavily pregnant. And then so for those reasons, I'm like not super keen on DMing right now, but I think I'll enjoy it again. But yeah, we're planning out our campaign, and my friend and I are playing gnomes from the same village, so we have been trying to think of fun gnome names, because my character's name is Higgledy Piggledy and her name is Hodgepodge. And so we were basically trying to think of like silly gnome names to kind of round out our village. So we had like Willy Nilly, Teeny Weeny, I don't know, a bunch of silly names like that. And I had like posted it on Twitter to see if, I could, crowdsource some other suggestions, and like so many people responded. So I have like a huge list of like silly, ridiculous gnome names now. So that was fun. I'm excited.
That's awesome. We finished our D&D campaign, and since then we have kind of a Star Wars like West March style campaign going on right now. So we've got several DMs that are just kind of DMing in this world that we've sort of created. I mean, we didn't create the Star Wars world, so, yeah, but it's been pretty good. That's been pretty good. Have you played the Star Wars RPG at all?
I would love to, because I love Star Wars, so that's definitely a goal of mine. I've heard kind of mixed things about the game, but I'm definitely open to it just because I love Star Wars so much, and it just sounds fun to play in, a Star Wars game. So I don't know, maybe 2023 I would like to try it out.
Mixed as in like it's either super awesome or terrific? I mean, I don't know how.
I mean, I feel like I would probably like it. I just, when I've asked my other friends in gaming communities, there seems to be kind of like, I don't know, some people love it and some people like don't love it. But yeah, having not played it myself, I don't have an opinion about it. I would certainly 100% try it because it sounds really fun.
I think if anything, it's worth trying. Like, have you played the narrative dice systems before?
I have not.
Yeah, and you don't have to play it in the Star Wars, right? With the release of Genesis that came out and the application of that narrative dice to many other RPGs, that itself is worth an experience to kind of open the aperture to what that can do for storytelling in terms of having the GM and the players be mutual storytellers in the experience. That's my thoughts.
Yeah.
We have a kind of a resident expert here in Dan. Dan's been playing the Star Wars RPG system since like the 80s.
Oh,
He's
wow.
gone through all of the systems probably.
Yeah.
This is true. I'm guilty as charged. Yeah. No, I'll back up what Jay said. I mean, I think the early West End system in the 80s was a great way to get a lot of people who didn't have experience with D&D into role playing, and it was a really low barrier of entry. Everything was D6s, which means if you had a box game of Risk and a box of Monopoly, you pretty much had enough dice to play, and you just bought the hardbound book. But it's changed a lot over the years, and it took like, I don't know, four major editions, I think, for the and 4 editions, 3 companies to kind of get a sweet spot. So now it feels right with the narrative dice system, and so I was so hooked on it. I had the D20 version that Wizards of the Coast did. I had the whole library. And a few years ago, right before COVID, I just said, I'm going to part with these on eBay while they still have good value. And I'm fine. I haven't needed to turn around and go back to it. Or I don't regret that purchase, let me say. So anyway, the box sets are really great. The problem with the game right now is because I think the license is winding down just a smidge. It's a little harder to get your hands on products. So it could be changing substantially, or they could be the current studio that has access to it's called Edge Studio. If they would release some new products and reprint the custom dice, that would be really swell. But don't get me started on that. Sorry.
I want to pull on something Dan said too. Is once those earlier games that were D6 games, once you take that D6 out of that Monopoly game, just never put it back.
It's a done deal. Yeah. Now, that was a big deal back in the day to get access to dice. I mean, I lived in Las Vegas, and we could get craps dice at 7-Eleven. But other than that, it was kind of hard to find dice in 1988.
Yeah, very true. Very true. I guess I'm the last Geek Week guy. So my Geek Week has been immersed in the Adobe Creative Cloud. And I've been learning all about Illustrator, InDesign, and kind of putting those skills to use to get ready to put out some of our tabletop and beyond content that we will have as part of a Patreon account coming up in 2023. So we're going to be offering monthly one-shot adventures that may tie loosely to each other, that can be used as like a campaign eventually if you wanted to kind of string some adventures together, depending. And so getting ready for production of those. Jason and I have been kind of going back and forth on what we want to put in there. So I've got my InDesign ready to go.
Yeah, it's fun because Justin and I and Dan, Ashley, we've all been DMs for probably a lot of years collected between us. But none of us, I don't think, have ever really published anything we've ever done, even though a lot of it has been homebrew inside of systems. So we're excited to collect all these little mini adventures that we've done and make them accessible to a larger audience. I'm excited. And we have some other special things that are coming on our Patreon too.
Yeah.
Right. With our partner in crime, the Baron of Dice, who we mentioned a few times. We have a special limited edition, one print only tabletop and beyond dice that will be made available to our Patreon backers.
Yeah.
So excited for that. Yeah.
Stay
tuned.
It'll be great. It'll be very good. So that kind of leads us sort of a segue into our main topic, Ashley, which is you and the Storytelling Collective. So you obviously have been playing RPGs for a while. When did you start getting into RPGs and gaming?
Sure. I always feel like my answer to this is a little like it wasn't very linear. I was really interested in D&D when I was a kid. I used to look at D&D books at the library, but I didn't know anyone who played D&D or really any sort of tabletop game. I was always I always had geeky friends, but no one was really into that sort of hobby. But I knew that as someone who just always loved books and always loved, fantasy and sci-fi, and I was a big theater geek. Like I knew at some point that was a hobby that I wanted to get into because it kind of combined all of my interests. But it really took until I was well into adulthood to find other, people in my life who were also, eager to try that out. And it just so happens that one of my good friends has been DMing for decades, and we were just all kind of hanging out one night. I think this was like, 2015 or something like that, and we all finally agreed, like, let's just try to play D&D. We have a friend who is really good at all of this and has been DMing, for every edition basically, and can get us started. And we all want to play this. We've all wanted to play this since we were kids, so we might as well all try. And so we finally started a regular game, and I just got so obsessed with it. Like I knew I would be. So, and as someone who's been, a writer in some capacity for my whole life, once I really got into playing, I knew pretty much immediately that I also wanted to learn how to write that kind of content. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of love at first dice roll, and that's kind of just been my life ever since. It's like I think of my life now as kind of like before D&D and after D&D. So yeah, when I look back, I'm like, I don't know what really took me so long. I think a lot of it was that I didn't really know how a tabletop game was facilitated. Obviously, you could read the Dungeon Master's Guide or read resources like that, but I think I just didn't really fully understand how, the game system worked. And I do think that a lot of tabletop games are made better when someone can really introduce you to them and kind of show you things. Like I am horrible at learning the rules of board games and things like that. I have to just kind of play to learn. Like if I read a technical manual or something like that, my brain just turns to static. I have to play in order to learn. So for me, getting the experience to actually play really kind of sealed the deal. But yeah, so it's in a lot of ways, it's a recent development in my life, although I don't know how I really went without, playing and writing D&D. So yeah, that's kind of my history, but I will say I've always been super geeky about everything kind of adjacent to D&D and tabletop games.
So did you start playing in 5th edition?
I did, yeah. But since when I decided to start writing for D&D, I did do some research on previous editions just so I would have that kind of foundational knowledge. But yes, my entry point was 5th edition.
I mean, to be honest, so was mine. You know, I started playing 5th edition. I think the first real RPG game I played was we had a little kind of mini convention, and we played the Horde of the Dragon Queen starter box. You know, and just I was like, this is awesome. This is awesome, you know, especially when one of the guys, you know, I was playing with some very seasoned RPGers, including Dan here, and we had another guy in the group named Dan, another Dan, and during the game, he found these dead rats that we had accidentally killed, I think, and he picked one up, and he would picked a bunch of them up, and he would put them in people's pockets. Using
I think I was running that session.
Stealth and sleight of hand and stuff like that, where he would put them in people's pockets. So the mayor of the town reached in his pocket and pulled out a dead rat at one point.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, what is this game that we're playing that you can just do that? You know, and I said, this is amazing. And even though it was really silly, I saw the possibility of being able to craft the story the way that you want to tell it. You know.
Yeah.
It may not always be dead rats in people's pockets, you know, but
Yeah.
I had a dead rat in my pocket. Womp, womp, womp.
That was also the session where I think, Dan, you learned that when everyone was walking through a tunnel to try to escape and you were wading ankle deep in water and you got mad at the rats, and I think you tried to shoot some sort of lightning spell at the rats straight down into the water that everybody was standing in.
Yeah.
That made for a fun
problem
experience.
there.
Yep.
It wasn't explicit that water's conductive in the player's handbook, but I'm going to follow the logic of it. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. That's exciting that you kind of found that love. I mean, I know that myself, I was reading fantasy novels and playing all sorts of RPG games, and so I know for me, for a long time, there was sort of this stigma of well, you're just going to roll a 20-sided dice, and and then finally I got to a point where I'm like, all of my friends that I'm talking about all of these books and movies and games and stuff like that, they're playing that too, and I'm I was starting to realize that that was something that I should probably also be doing if I liked all the peripheral things that you kind of were alluding to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely how it came about for me. I have always had geeky friends, and it just, I don't know, I'm glad the stars finally aligned where the people in my life are people who also wanted to play D&D and really wanted to obsess about it, because when I, start to, learn about something new, I really obsess over it. So it was nice to be validated by my friends and have us all just be so into our game and our campaigns. It was really, really fun. And it still is fun. We still, play when we can, but as a new parent, I haven't had a lot of D&D time this year, so I'm looking forward to getting back to that next year. But yeah, I'm really grateful that I eventually found D&D and people to play with.
Now, you talked about, doing a lot of writing stuff, and, you knew that kind of writing D&D content was going to be a part of this as you started to play it. Can you talk about sort of your day job and then your night job, which is sort of, kind of doing some of the D&D writing? So maybe start with what do you do in the day job that kind of lent itself to wanting to write D&D adventures?
Sure. So I'll say that I've always had kind of an eclectic career as a writer in different ways. I knew from a young age that I wanted to do something with writing or books or something related to that when I was an adult. I was very open to whatever that looked like. And so I studied English literature in college, and I have my master's degree in literacy studies. And so a lot of what I, did during that time was work with other writers. I was a writing consultant for students at my university. I was a journalist for several years. I worked in libraries. I taught writing programs in some of the local high schools. I taught English 101 at the local community college. And through that, eventually I got into content strategy, which is currently what I do now, which is basically using writing in marketing. And so I've done that for startups for the past 10 years or so at this point. So I've always done something writing related. I have always been really interested in creative writing in different mediums as well. I love poetry. I love writing short stories. I'm working on a novel. I've written other novels before. I love writing scripts and screenplays. Basically, I just love storytelling. It's all in all of its many mediums. So that was why when I started to play D&D, I knew that I wanted to learn how storytelling for that specific medium worked. And so that's kind of why I felt eager to kind of learn about that really early on in my D&D playing journey. Because I don't think most people necessarily do that, where they start to learn how to play D&D and they immediately want to write for it. But that's just kind of how I think, just because I like literacy. I love storytelling in all of its forms. So I'm always looking for ways to learn more about that. So I think, my career has just been kind of wherever I could find opportunities to write, I would take them. I've never been super picky about it, just because I love to write. And also writing, it's not always the most lucrative career path. So I've tried to be really realistic about how can I use what I'm passionate about and still support myself, support my family, support my creative endeavors. Because I do think that being a starving artist is not, I don't like glamorizing that. I don't like glamorizing the grind. So I did always want to make sure that I could, have the freedom to be creative in my life and not feel like I'm constantly trying to hustle to make ends meet. I mean, that said, there's a lot of work that goes into being an independent creator, as I think all of you probably know. But it's nice to have a day job where I can use my skills and do research and writing and all the things that I love, and then be able to do my night job, as you said, which I always say that I moonlight as a D&D writer because it sounds, I think, fun and mysterious. And I just try to, prioritize, doing both things in my life. But so I think my day job, it allows me to think about technical writing, which I think is really important when it comes to writing for D&D and tabletop adventures, writing things that are structured and very clear. In marketing, that's, really important to have very clear copywriting. You could still be evocative, but you're trying to convey specific information to people. And I work for a financial company, so even more so, I have to be very mindful of the types of words that I'm using to convey certain concepts. And I think that really carries over into writing for a tabletop, because like we talk about in Storytelling Collective, writing for a tabletop, you're writing technical documents. Basically, you're writing game manuals, and even though they're stories and they follow traditional narrative flow, you're still writing something that is not a traditional short story or a novel. A campaign setting is not equal to a novel in terms of how those are written. So I think that having some of those technical writing skills has really helped me out. So I feel like when I switch back and forth, I'm able to do that fairly seamlessly at this point, just because that's kind of where my mind is when I'm writing creatively. But now that I'm going back to writing some more traditional writing, I'm working on a novel right now, that's actually been kind of trickier because I'm still in tabletop writing mode and there's a lot of differences there. So it's all just practice.
Yeah, I don't think you need a stat block for the for maybe some financial tables that you got to put out, right?
Correct.
So it's funny that you talk about this, because I am a communications consultant, and I contract with the federal government, and so my day job is all about writing and content creation, and making sure that we're using the right words, and it's got to be very stodgy is the wrong word there, but it's kind of stodgy in the sense that it's a big bureaucracy federal government, right? It's not the normal flowy kind of D&D style play that you would think of. But on one hand, knowing how to write in that structure, I think definitely helps translate into putting out products, right? And organizing and laying things out and making sure that that flows correctly. And because I've met lots of people who have amazing ideas and amazing stories in their heads, and they just have troubles kind of getting that out onto the paper and putting it out like that. So I could definitely see how your background really lends kind of a one-up to being able to put out some D&D products.
Yeah, and one thing that I feel like is a benefit of having done so many weird types of writing is that it allowed me to really hone my creative process over the past, I don't know, a decade and a half that I've been really actively working as a writer in some way. And that is something that you really can't fast track your way through. It really does take time to develop a creative process that helps you, as you said, get the ideas out of your head, because writing is hard. Writing is, I think, the ideas and even ideation can be tricky. I'm not trying to undermine the fact that coming up with good ideas is its own kind of skill set. But for the most part, people have ideas. They kind of know the tone and the vibe, and they have these scenes in their head of what they want to convey. But actually getting that out onto paper, whether that's, digital or analog, is very hard. And there is structure and process that goes into that. No one's process will necessarily be the same as someone else's, but there is a technical aspect to writing, even when you're writing something very creative. And I feel like something that I've learned a lot just through kind of studying creativity and the creative process is that people conflate, being like artsy with being creative, and being creative is really about being a problem solver. And so it's not something that should necessarily be 100% fluid. Like having some structure there is a good thing. So I think when people can bridge those two sides of writing, the really, open-ended part and then the kind of structured part, that's when you can actually get projects done, and you can start to hone your creative process. But it takes time to really develop that, and it took me many years, and I'm still always refining my creative process.
Yeah. Hey, Ashley, question on that. So, I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand, is that a lot of our life is built around process and workflows to accomplish things, even if they're natural to us and we don't see them as strictly formalized things that are written down and step by step. Most of our lives do follow a workflow that we kind of tailor to ourselves. But for someone who's like, I really, I've got these ideas, I want to write, there are these situations I want to explore in a creative way, but I just have no process to start with at all. Like, is there like an easy way that you direct people of, look, if you don't have a process, let's start with this one and tailor it for you? Is there a directed place you could go to?
Yeah,
absolutely. It's like a storytelling collective.
I was going to say, yeah, absolutely. So funny you should ask. No, but without just like upselling my own projects. And
you can upsell away, by the way.
Okay.
Well, and really, I think a good answer is not go to my website. A good answer is, what have you learned that you could share with us?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one thing is that I completely agree with you that we have processes and workflows in our life, whether we realize it or not. And sometimes those processes are conducive to our goals and sometimes they're not. But I think it's important to kind of embrace the fact that that is part of our lives. And because a lot of people kind of bristle at like that, and it's not so much that we need to optimize every single process in our life, or I'm really personally like very against like hustle culture when it comes to creativity. Like I do not ever advise that people should get up at the crack of dawn every single day to write 1,000 words and blah blah blah. Like that is not something that I personally believe in, unless that's something that really works for someone, just because I think for the average person that is unattainable, and it's not really helpful for most people to actually meet their specific goals. So to your question, something that I recommend anyone do when they're trying to kind of learn a creative process is to start really, really, really small with something. And so if you want to, if you're, think about your goals. If you aspire to write a one-shot adventure, for example, that's a really great goal. That's still a fairly big project to do without kind of building up to it. And so I think that you can still be really ambitious, but kind of start a little bit smaller than that. So what I would recommend for someone who has a goal like that is to start by writing like a 1-paragraph encounter. Like we actually have an encounter workshop, but again, I'm not trying to like direct people to that, but I'm just going to share kind of what we do in that. So for example, we start with kind of like a 3-line encounter, like who are you meeting? What are you doing? Like what's the kind of little goal within this little encounter? And I think if you can start by writing those kinds of things consistently, you can start building upon that little by little. So if you can write an encounter, a paragraph encounter, maybe once a week for a few weeks or every other day. I don't like to say to do things every day, because I really think that our time is so limited that doing things every single day when you're first starting out something is not always very helpful advice. But I think if you can do it on some level of consistency, whether that's, once or twice a week, you have like an hour that you put aside for writing, and just try to knock something out. If you can learn how to start and finish a small project, that really gives you a foundation for how you work, how you like to work. If you find that you're really struggling to just get that one paragraph done, then you can kind of reflect on that. Like, what's the obstacle that I'm encountering here? Is it because when I'm starting with a blank page, I freeze up? Do I need to have a better ideation process? Is there something that I can do to kind of kickstart myself into writing? And it's only really by doing these little tiny projects that you start and complete that you can learn those things about yourself, because that's different for every single person. Like for me personally, I always have to make a playlist and like a mood board and like have lots of inspirational things around me when I'm starting a new project, because I like to be really immersed in something that I'm doing. And so for me, those are fundamental. But I didn't really learn that about myself until I was really actively doing a lot of creative projects on a really consistent basis. So I would say to really start small, like start super, super small, commit to doing, with some regularity, a small thing. Then you can kind of work up to the next stage of that. Then you can do a 1-page encounter, and that you can really start to flesh that out a little bit more. You can add a map to that, add a stat block, or kind of take it to the next level. Then when you've started and completed a few of those 1-page encounters, first of all, you start to have a nice little portfolio that you've created for yourself. Then you can kind of work up to the next project. So I really think that if you can kind of be, somewhat methodical about it, and really think through your goal as something that you can break into really small pieces, that's how you learn about your own creative process. Because it's really hard for me to say do this, and this, because that will be different for everyone. But the best place to start is by doing something small. And if you learn how to complete something, you'll also know how long it takes you to do something, which then helps you actually set reasonable expectations for yourself. Something I was talking about recently with a friend of mine is National Novel Writing Month, which just ended. And that is it's national, but I think it's actually international at this point. It's basically a writing challenge where people try to write 50,000 words for a book in 1 month. And we were talking about how most people don't actually meet that goal, because most people who are signing up for it have never done a project like that before. And writing 50,000 words in 1 month is a lot of words. You have to be really mindful of that. And so I think creative projects like that are awesome. Like there's no harm in trying it, but if you feel discouraged because you're doing something like that, it's probably because you're taking on too much before you've kind of worked up to that. So that would be my first kind of piece of advice, is start small and work up to the bigger things, and really commit to working up to the bigger things and treat it as practice.
Yeah, I like what you said. Learn how to complete something.
Yes.
Yeah, start small so you can figure that out. That's good.
My most successful one-shot writings have been when I've slightly overcommitted myself to a deadline to run something at a convention, and working backwards from that, saying, okay, people are coming to this thing. I need to do a good job. This is not just me flying by the seat of my pants with my buddies. I need to make this a quality thing. And I think the best stuff I've ever written has been for conventions. My problem is I keep playing around in IPs where I can't go post that stuff on Drive Through RPG and make a buck.
Right.
Because I write the stuff and I go, okay, that's for an IP. I could put it out to the universe for funsies otherwise. It doesn't really have a utility. But I think for me personally, this is just me talking about me, which is my favorite subject. The deadline piece helps, because I could say, yeah, I can write 2 paragraphs, but if I don't have an application to put it to, with a tangible application that I could see legitimately in the future, it's harder for me to get motivated.
Yeah, and kind of 2 points to that. One is that it's good to know if you're the kind of person who needs that. It's not external validation, but kind of external accountability for a project like that. Some people do really well with that, where setting a deadline that involves other people is a really helpful motivator for them to actually finish something and do it to a certain quality, knowing that other people are going to interact with that. I think if that's your very first project you're ever doing, there's that might be helpful for some people. I feel like for me that was kind of helpful because I knew that my home group was going to play my very first adventure to playtest, and so I wanted to do a good job for them. But I think for some writers that could also be daunting and might have the kind of adverse effect where they're thinking about people's response to their adventure while they're in the drafting phase. And something that one of our instructors says, Beth Ball, she runs one of our courses at Storytelling Collective. She told me about her own process. She's a very prolific novelist, so she writes novels and has a great process for that. She told me that when she's writing her first draft, she doesn't invite the readers in too early. And that means like mentally, when she's doing her first draft, she's not thinking about what other people are going to think about it. She's just trying to tell the story to herself so she can get it out. Because even though we know a story that we want to tell, we might not know all the actual individual things in that story. And so that's what that first draft process can be and kind of should be. So I always thought that was kind of a good take on that. And also I do think that, I think again, external motivation is really motivating and can really hold you accountable. But for me, I also think it's important that writers learn how to love the process and write for themselves as well, because that's when you always have something to come back to when writing gets hard. If you have fun just geeking out about your own story and you really go all in on making your mood boards and playlists and having your inspirational, images or art that you commission, like that really, it allows you to fully just immerse yourself in your own story and really find joy in the process of creating without thinking about other people. So I think the best processes have a mix of both, where you are, hoping that people will read and play your adventures. But if you can also just have fun creating it, that's also very motivating, just because it's a fun thing to do. And I love writing just because writing I find really fun. I write a lot of things purely for myself that no one is ever going to read, just because I enjoy writing. So I think if you can do both, you'll probably find a process that really works for you.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah, understanding yourself is really important. It's like, am I doing this for the purpose of getting validation externally, or am I doing this to get validation internally? And to thine own self be true. Figure out what works best for you and go from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Jason.
No, go ahead, Jason.
No, you, Jason. No, okay. So I think you said something. One of your writers, I missed the name, but you said they're in their process, right? They don't introduce the writers too early, and that I think is important. I think a lot. I'll give you an example, right? Every time we had a kid, and we had several, so I've had a little bit of experience with this. But every time we had a kid, you come up with a name, and people are like, "Hey, what you gonna name your kid?" It's like, "No, we're not telling you." And people always be like, "Why? Why not?" It's because we're creating the name for this, this new family member that means something to us. And if I share it with you before the kid comes, then I'm going to have an opportunity for you to give me feedback that maybe I don't want, right? Or feedback that's going to influence how I feel about the decision I made for the name for that child. And I saw that with people where they'd say, "Well, we're thinking about naming her, Alice." And then people will be like, "Oh yeah, Alice. Well, I kind of had, I had a grandma named Alice," and then it starts to have an influence. So I think you have to be ready. Like, be honest with yourself. Do I want input right now, or do I not want input right now? And when I've started writing stuff, I would get input from people, and I would start to realize, oh, this is actually kind of detrimental to my creative process for this story or this situation that I'm developing. And so one time I took a challenge in a horror competition to write a 2,000 word short story, and I did it. And I said, I'm not showing anybody until it's done. And so I got all 2,000 words, and then I gave it to a bunch of buddies and said, "Hey guys, what do you think?" And at that point, I'd already developed the situation, I'd already developed the plot, I'd already developed the story, and they were really just there to make sure it kind of tied together and it made sense. But I was ready for input at that point. I'd kind of developed what I wanted. So I think that's good input. I guess my question would be is, how do you figure out when you're an early stage writer, like, what should you do? Should you just wait until you have like 3/4 of your stuff developed, or like, when should you start introducing that early feedback without it being, maybe detrimental to your process?
I don't know if there is one good answer to this. I will just say that, again, this comes with practice. So if you find that when you're getting 3/4 of the way through, writing your 1-page encounters, and you feel stuck and you feel like you need someone else's input, or you feel like you're not sure how to kind of overcome the next, obstacle, then once you've done that a few times, then you kind of know for yourself, okay, at this point of this process, I want to start inviting people in to, weigh in and help me out. You might find that you want people to be involved in the ideation stage. Sometimes I like talking to my husband about an idea that I have for something, because it kind of helps me refine it. And then I don't really, talk about the story for a while after that, once I kind of have that initial premise. And then once I have, the very messy first draft done. Like for me, I don't really want to talk to anyone about a certain project when I'm in that kind of first part. So I like the very early discussions and ideation, and then after the first draft is done, to actually have people involved. And I think for some people, they want something that is a little bit more complete before they get feedback from someone else. So I don't know if there's one specific answer. I never want to say like, just do something and then figure it out, because I always think when it comes to creativity that's terrible advice. Like I compare it to when I wanted to learn about knitting and someone was like, well, just do it. And I'm like, there's so much to knitting that I don't know really where to start. How do I cast on? There's so many different ways that you can cast on. Like when I'm done with my project, how do I cast off? How do I actually complete this hat and like stitch it together? So I think I kind of take the same approach when it comes to writing, that I don't want to just say like, oh, no, just do it and figure it out. But there's so many nuances in the writing process for individual people. I will say that I personally believe that it's nice to have something kind of fleshed out before you start asking people. And it's also like, what are you asking people for? Are you asking people for just their good vibes to finish your project? I have a friend who just sent me the first few chapters of a book that she's writing, and she called it just like a positivity pass. It's just, here's what I'm working on. It's super messy. I just kind of want your, support for this project. Here's what I'm working on. And so I know that also, just to give her basically like, this is so cool. Like, here's the things that I'm really loving about this direction, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to give her like criticism or things like that. So that's something that you could kind of also do as a creative, is specify what you're looking for. But it's also just asking yourself, like, what am I looking for here? Do I want people to just hype me up at this point? Totally valid. Something that you can totally ask for. Are you looking for very specific feedback? If you're looking for very specific feedback on, pacing or, characters or things like that, I think it's better to have something a little bit more fleshed out to give people, because it's kind of hard for people to really see what you're going for if you don't have that for them. If you're looking for just kind of general feedback on your premise and your idea, then that's something you can do really early on. You still kind of need to provide people with a summary. So I think you just need to ask yourself the questions like, what am I looking for with someone else right now? Like, what do I need from someone? And then from that answer, and be honest with yourself. If you just really want someone to be like, this is so cool, then you can do that at any stage, but just be honest with yourself about what you're looking for. And that will help you determine at what stage you ask for that.
So Ashley, this is all like awesome writing feedback. And one of the things that struck me as you were talking about was, how can you find your process, your own process, right? You talked about doing mood boards. You talked about, finding your own voice before you're introducing others, different things like that. And so I know that I kind of alluded to it before, but I kind of want to shift a little bit and really talk about your storytelling collective project that you have, because I feel like everything that you've talked about would help a brand new writer, someone who says, I've got a story in my head, I don't know how to start or finish it, just like that knitting that you talked about, right? I just don't know how to do this. How does, let's talk about your storytelling collective. And I'm going to give a little bit of context here, because it's something that I signed up for in the summertime when I did the Write Your First Adventure, the Chaosium Path. And I hadn't played a lot of Call of Cthulhu. I'd done a little bit of it, and that's the inner path I guess I chose with Chaosium, right? I did Cthulhu instead of RuneQuest. And I was really impressed by this. I was very, very impressed by this. The thing that I loved about it was that every day you had something to do, and it was bite-sized chunks, very bite-sized chunks, something that you could do in 15, 20 minutes. Just sit down, do something in 15, 20 minutes. You could do it in the morning, you could do it in the afternoon, you could do it in the evening. If you missed a day, you could do 2 the next day. It wasn't so much that you felt overwhelmed, and I thought that, especially in the beginning, doing it kind of took you through some different creative things. Like, first one, you're talking about, like, just what's the general idea of your adventure. Next, you're talking about, how do I develop a bad guy? Like, what's the bad guy all about? What's his motivations? And it kind of took you through different things before you actually even started putting, like, pen to paper. You're starting to kind of collect all of that stuff. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about the Storytelling Collective? How did it start? How's it going? What's the feedback that you're getting from it? That kind of thing.
Sure. Well, I'm so glad you had a good experience, and everything you said really means a lot to us, because we really try to craft our curriculum very thoughtfully to account for busy people, and to basically put into action all the things that I'm talking about, really take people step by step through a sample creative process so that they can refine it and take what they like and hopefully what they don't like as well, and make their own from that. So the Storytelling Collective was originally called the RPG Writer Workshop. I started it in July of 2018. At that time, I was writing D&D one-shots for DM's Guild like a fiend. I was writing like a one-shot at least once a month, and then I don't know, I just had so many projects going on, and that had been going on for about 6 months at that point. So I had quite a bit under my belt, and I was getting some cool new opportunities in D&D writing. And so I started getting emails from people like, how do I get started writing for DM's Guild? How do I write a one-shot adventure? And I had done a lot of research before I started writing, just because that's how I operate. And so I felt like at that point, even though I was new to it, that I had some guidance that I could share. And one thing that I always consider my strength is being able to start and finish a project. And I also, had experience working with writers. And so I felt like all of that kind of empowered me to basically put together some educational materials for people who wanted to specifically write and publish D&D content, not so much DM, because there's a lot of great information out there about DMing, but writing and publishing D&D content didn't really at that time have a lot of kind of guided educational resources. So I had put together just this email series at the time, and I just put the link out on Twitter, and I'm like, if anyone wants to do an RPG writer workshop with me this summer, sign up for my email list. And like 500 people signed up like immediately. And I was like, whoa, wow. Okay. Had no idea that there was that much demand for this kind of, guidance and educational material. And so our community grew like super quickly, basically out of nowhere. I'm still kind of, when I look back on that, I'm like, well, so much happened so quickly. And so I realized then that there was definitely a need for this kind of program. And so that's when the RPG Writer Workshop really became like a real program. And so I also kind of structured it after National Novel Writing Month, in the sense that I wanted to have a very specific project-based, workshop for people to do within 1 month, because I did feel personally that putting together a one-shot adventure in 1 month was attainable, mostly because that's what I had been doing. And someone was like, there should be a National Novel Writing Month, but for D&D. And I was like, hey, I can do that.
Way more obtainable than 50,000 word novel.
I think so too. Although
way more obtainable
for sure. I mean, I really do think NaNoWriMo is a really challenging challenge. I mean, it's fun, but I think it's difficult. But I also think with our program, part of our program entails actually putting your adventure into layout and actually publishing it. Yeah. And so there are some challenges within ours as well that I think make the 1 month structure. It is tricky, even though we do try to make it really bite-sized. So I also realized, because the first workshop was all just me. It was just me writing basically what my personal creative process was, kind of to what we were all talking about, like giving people a sample process based off of what I was doing, what was working for me, with the caveat that I did not expect everyone else to find that process perfect for them. It was just, here's something to get started. Here's what I do and what gets me from point A to point B. And, gets me to kind of have a finished product at the end of a month. Then I decided, it would be better if I could bring in other people to help me kind of flesh out this curriculum. I don't believe that any one writer has all of the answers, and so I wanted to have our curriculum really reflect other people in the community. And so I just kind of recruited other people that I knew were publishing on DM's Guild at the time, and we started to kind of really build out this curriculum, with me kind of serving as the curriculum director, just given my background in actually developing curriculum for educational settings. And then the community just really grew and has continued to grow. I mean, at this point, we just ran our 10th cohort of Write Your First Adventure. That's what the workshop ended up becoming. Just because I wanted to be very specific about what that workshop was. It wasn't just an RPG writer workshop. It was very specifically to write your first adventure for a game system that you want to publish for. And yeah, we just finished our 10th cohort, and we've had more than 12,000 people take our programs. And
it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-blowing. When I look at that number, I'm like, that's wild to me. And and so we've added multiple paths. So it used to just be D&D, just because that was what I was doing. But then we partnered with Chaosium a couple years ago. I'm trying to remember exactly when that was. That honestly, anything from 2020 after is kind of a blur to me at this point. Since so much happened. Actually, that was our biggest cohort ever, was in the summer of 2020. I think a lot of people were looking for something to do during the pandemic, and obviously the pandemic's still going on, but that was kind of at the scary part of it. And our community really grew then. And so we partnered with Chaosium, and we were able to do our Call of Cthulhu path and the RuneQuest path, and continue to open that up to other game systems. It's grown really rapidly. We have really refined the curriculum. Actually, every year we do kind of a curriculum overhaul to really account for both our, what our community is expressing, where they're getting stuck at different stages of the workshop. How can we really help people get over those obstacles so they can finish? We don't really completely restructure it, but we do try to have it evolve, because it naturally kind of evolves. Every cohort is unique, and we get different feedback every time. And so we try to always improve the curriculum based off of that feedback. And again, there's no one process that's going to work for everyone. So we've actually swapped the order of lessons quite a few times based off of feedback, and the feedback's always different. People are like, why do you do, layout before editing, or why do you do editing before layout? And it's there's no perfect answer to that. We just have to give you some structure, and then you might find that you want to reverse it and things like that. So that's kind of what drives just the general structure of it. And per what you said, we try to make things very bite-sized and actionable. We want people to have a finished project by the end of the month. That is, I wouldn't actually say that that's our main goal. Our main goal is to help people practice a creative process, to just go from start to finish, even if they don't publish or finish their adventure. We want you to at least try out each of these steps and have what we call a creative toolkit, so that you can pull from it and actually finish any project that you start. So that is what I would say is our main goal. But of course, we want you to publish and put your work out there in the world too. So that's a secondary goal.
Do you have stats on how many people actually finish?
A lot of people ask me that. I will say I don't really have clear stats on that, because it's not usually that cut and dry. So for example, like you mentioned, you had been working on your adventure, you'll probably end up publishing it, but it wasn't necessarily within the month that you took the workshop.
Right, exactly.
So it's a little hard for me to say that. And also, we've had a lot of people take our workshops multiple times, which is always exciting. Some people like that structure a lot, and so they'll take it more than once so that they can work on an adventure each time. So people have published multiple adventures, so that kind of skews my numbers a little bit. I mean, we've had, from our, the 12,000 people who have gone through it, we've, thousands of adventures have come out of that. So I feel like our completion rates are very positive. And I will say though that, again, because our goal isn't necessarily publishing, we just want you to learn your creative process. It's not something that I get too caught up on. I mostly look at who's completed the workshop materials rather than who's published their adventure, if that makes sense.
I think that's a much better metric than who's actually published. Because the thing is you may get through it and realize you've got kind of an ugly baby. and you don't want that baby to see the light of day, which is totally fine because like you've gone through your process, right? And you may say, hey, this wasn't the beautiful baby. The next one's going to be better because I've kind of worked through this and I've done it. And I agree. I think getting through the course material, working through that creative process, learning something about yourself, and kind of committing to just go with it. Those are the big things, right? Like those are the changing, like the writer's changes that happen, rather than just being like, ta-da, I published something. Because honestly, anybody can publish anything. Like, it doesn't mean it's like necessarily good or it went through. Like, so I think focusing on how people work through this and indulging in that creativity is so key. I think that's a much better view than numbers on whether you published or not.
Yeah, and I feel like, and one piece of writing advice that I got when I was younger was when I wanted to just write books, and I feel like books at that time just meant novels, I guess. But for me, like now I aspire to write all sorts of things. But at the time, I talked to a very prolific writer, and she was saying that the best way to, work up to that is to write practice novels. Like, spend the time writing full novels, but you don't necessarily have to publish everything that you write. Like, yeah, it feels like a big time investment to work on projects that you're not necessarily going to do something with, but the practice is invaluable there. And so I've written so many things that I don't think I'll ever really do anything with, but they taught me something every time I worked on it. And I might even go back and revisit those and make them better now that I know more of these things about myself. And there's a project that I've been working on since I was in my early 20s, and I'm 34 now. And I'm really glad I didn't publish it at the time that I was writing it, because I look back at it now and the way I can write it now is so much, I think, better and truer to who I am as a writer, that I think it wasn't the right project for me at the time. So I'm kind of glad that I invested the time in learning more about those things. But you never really know when the right time is going to be, so you shouldn't sit on your work for forever. But there's some things that you kind of have a gut feeling about, and so I think it's good to kind of follow that and invest the time in practicing. It's, again, find joy in the act of writing just for fun and writing for yourself. And then that's when you can kind of identify for yourself, like, oh, there's something here that I think other people will really positively respond to, but you might not know what that is right away.
Yeah, it's like you got to prototype it.
Yes.
First, work on a prototype, figure out how to complete a prototype, then sit back, look at it, and use that to spawn other ideas.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the engineer talking, by the way. He's our engineer.
Sorry.
My husband's an engineer, so that sounds very, very familiar to me.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we want to be cognizant of your time. So the last thing I wanted to end on a little bit is the D&D adventure, Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden. So you are a co-author of that book. Can you tell us what parts of the book you wrote?
It's been a while since I've worked on it, so I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I did write, let's see, I think I wrote at least 20 or 30,000 words of it, which I think...
Ooh, that's a good chunk.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it was divvied up. Again, don't quote me on that because it has been a few years. I worked on that in 2019, so that was a while ago. And I think that was fairly comparable. I mean, all the contributors, we expressed the kind of chapters and things that we wanted to work on and the sections. And so it's all pretty equally divvied up. And those books have, thousands of words in them. So I wrote Oral's Abode, which is the chapter where you get to go to the Frost Maiden's awesome Grimskull castle. And I wrote, I'm trying to remember the names of everything. There's this fun encounter toward the beginning of the book where you can meet two wolves who are kind of like bad wolf, good wolf, bad wolf, and they try to like kind of swindle people who encounter them, and that was really fun. I wrote a section about this ring of ice giants that are kind of like frozen.
Ooh, that was a good one we had.
Yeah,
I remember that one.
Oh, good. I'm glad you liked it. I wrote. Basically, so there's the 10 towns at the beginning of the campaign, and so a lot of that was kind of divvied up. So we each wrote, I think, a couple of those. And so I think I want to say East Haven and...
Okay.
Oh my gosh. I'm like totally blanking. I haven't read through the book in a while because I actually want to play it with my group, and I kind of want to play it as a player. So I was kind of like trying not to refresh myself on it because there's a lot of sections that I don't remember because I didn't work on every single section. Yeah, I wrote the one about the whale that you can take as kind of like a submarine to get to the ice floes near Oral's abode. So yeah, a bunch of different little sections like that. There's this cave, I think it's called Cauldron Caves. There's 2 like cave networks early on in the campaign. So one chapter I did and one chapter Celeste Conowitch, who's an amazing writer, she wrote. So I did one where there's like a cool hag that you can meet. She's really fun. And yeah, that's what I can remember off the top of my head. But
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So one of the things that stood out for me as a DM in this book that I very much appreciated was the way that the 10 Towns was written was so sandboxy for everybody that you could just go do whatever you wanted and you may do with this town. And there were towns that we didn't even do, right? Because there's just so much content in that book. You couldn't really do every adventure or side quest in every single town without like having to level up. I mean, I guess technically you could,
Sure.
But if you just never leveled anybody up, and didn't move on with the campaign. But we did a lot, and I just loved how people just kind of chose what to do and where to go, and I worked player secrets in there, and that just kind of became the impetus to find more adventures. I kind of tied player secrets to other plot hooks that were in the book, and so it felt like they were doing our players felt like they were doing a personal quest for somebody, even though it was a total quest that was in the book. It was like a plot hook. So a lot of the Ragged Glacier tribal stuff, we did a bunch of those, and that Ring of Ice Giants was a ton of fun, and we had a guy almost get killed several times. But it was like, if it hadn't been for our cleric who was able to turn himself invisible with a couple potions that they bought, like he would have been dead. So
I believe it. Yeah.
It's a pretty deadly campaign. And we played it with some very experienced RPGers that know how to kind of game the system a little bit and work together. And even they were struggling sometimes. Oral's Abode especially, like that whole we had quite. You remember that, Jason? Like the basement with the ice and the frost giant and all that.
Yeah.
In
I
fact,
remember having some overzealous players too that
That's
seemed
true.
like they would just go attack whatever they wanted to.
That's true. We had a couple of those. I will say though, did you design the part where like they had to go through the different doors and complete the quests?
Yeah. So
Inside the Grim Skull. Oh my gosh, that was my favorite part of the campaign.
I'm so glad.
Honestly.
Yeah. So I will say, when you work on a project like this, and I'm assuming this is, based off of how my friends have worked on other D&D books, like you're given what's called a story Bible. So we worked closely with Chris Perkins to kind of figure out like what is the goal of each chapter here. And so, but really when it comes to the actual writing assignment, you're basically given like one line and you're like, okay, this is what Chris wants. Here's like one line and you need to write like 15,000 words to kind of flesh it out. And that chapter, especially because it's kind of a climactic chapter, like you're, kind of on your way to meet Oral, depending on what goes on. And so there, there's a lot of high stakes there. And so working on that kind of gauntlet, like a lot of that kind of changed by the time I got to publication, but it was really rewarding to kind of think through the different, challenges and obstacles that people would find there beyond just, meeting, scary creatures and stuff like that. So I'm really glad you enjoyed it.
No, Jason, I think that was one part that stood out to a lot of our players. Remember how you had to go through the different doors?
Absolutely. Yeah, it really was. And I think what's interesting there is, and I've been thinking about this as we've been talking, right? Stephen King wrote a book called On Writing, a Memoir of the Craft. And in that book, he said, a strong enough, it's not like I have that book memorized, I just know this one thing. It's a strong enough situation renders the question of plot moot. And what's great about that part in the skull thingy was each one of those doors was a new situation. And once we went into it, it was like, you were dealing just with that. And even if it was just one sentence to kind of say, hey, this is what you got to write 15,000 words against, it's, taking the situation, that's what makes role-playing fun, is dealing with the situation with the understanding that there's an overall theme and something we're trying to do across, several months of playing this campaign. But it's dealing with the individual situations with these characters we've created. And I think that you did a good job creating unique feelings. So we stepped out of all right, we're just going to go from this area to this area and fight things along the way, to a problem-solving puzzle that were semi-interrelated to the overall objective. So I had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, I'm so glad. Yeah, I mean, puzzles, I love to write puzzles, but they are really challenging because you have to not make it so frustrating for players. Like, you have to give them reasonable, clues and ways to kind of drive the story forward. You don't want to totally lock people behind, you never want to lock a decision behind one single dice roll that could fail, because then how do they move forward? But it's tricky because you want it to be a challenge, because a challenge is fun, but it also has to be written clearly. And writing puzzles in games is really difficult because you're telling the DM basically, here's how to facilitate this puzzle, and that kind of, you don't want anything to get lost in translation there when they're trying to convey that to their players. So it's tricky. I mean, I think that those kinds of things are among the most challenging elements to write, but they're also really satisfying when you can kind of figure it out. But everything in those books is totally a collaboration, so I certainly won't take credit for how good it kind of turned out, but it was fun to be part of that process of strategizing that.
Well, the team did an amazing job. I honestly, it's my favorite D&D book that I have played. We've played a few other ones, and that one, just the way that it kind of started very wide and then narrowed at the end of the book, like, I think it pulled it off much better than a lot of other things. And I thought the setting was good with 10 towns, where at first I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting, but the idea of being able to just kind of move from town to town relatively easy, because like the distance was only like longest one was like an 8-hour walk or something like that. So that like there was facilitation of movement and being able to, like, every town had kind of its own unique feel, and that was just, I thought, wonderfully done. That the team did an amazing job, and we just had so much fun with it. So but Ashley, I think we're getting close to time. I know you have a baby you need to put to bed. So, we've all been there before.
Yeah, that's my life right now.
So, yeah, exactly. So we just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface of all the knowledge that you have in this kind of area, and RPGs and writing and all that. I'm sure we'd love to have you back another time to talk further about some of this stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm always happy to chat about all of these topics. It really is my passion, and there's a lot to talk about. So yeah, just let me know. But thanks. This was really fun, and it's always exciting to talk about these things. And I'm really glad that you had a positive experience in the workshop. That really means a lot to our whole team.
Yeah. Again, I've got so many more questions about the workshop that I feel like would be great for a podcast. So, but it was awesome to hear about your experience as a writer and how it all came about. And so, thank you again so much for being on the show. And for our listeners, if you have any questions, you can go on Twitter. There's the Story Writing Collective Twitter handle that puts out a lot of announcements, and also you can follow Ashley Warren on Twitter as well. So she's got a lot of followers and you put out a lot of stuff there. So that's great there.
Ashley, what's your Twitter in case people want to get
Sure. So my Twitter is at Ashley NH Warren. Be sure to use the middle 2 letters, because there's another Ashley Warren who's not me and probably gets a lot of weird D&D tweets. So yeah, it's Ashley NH Warren. And then yeah, we're also on Twitter at Storytelling Collective. It is at Storytelling COL. I think there's just one L. If you look that up, you'll probably find us. We have an ampersand in our logo, so that'll be us. Cool.
Thanks.
And your website is storytellingcollective.com. And there's the Write Your First Adventure modules in there that you can sign up for. But those happen on a kind of quarterly basis, I think.
Right now they are biannual, so we do them every July and November. Okay. But we also do a Write Your First D&D Encounter workshop as well, and those are also twice a year. And we're adding a lot of new RPG stuff next year. So we have other courses in the RPG Writer Workshop that you can take at any time of year. So those aren't our only offerings. So yeah, feel free to check out storytellingcollective.com and check out all of our programs.
Very good. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you like the show tonight, give us a share, give us a like and a follow, and give us a rating on whatever you listen to, whether it be Google Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, whatever you're listening to us on. Give us a rating because that helps the algorithm and other folks find us as well. So we appreciate all the support that we got. And Ashley, once again, thank you very much. And we wish everybody a wonderful evening. Have a good night.
See ya.
Good night. Thanks again.